Risk management seems like a foreign subject. It sounds intimidating, but it's totally opposite if you think about it. Every time you drive, you walk, you ride a bike, what do you try to do? You try to avoid harming yourself, harming properties, or harming others, right? If you have kids, you tell them what to do, what not to do. Why? To avoid harm for themselves, properties, and the people, others around them. That's risk management at its best. In this course or in this training, what we are going to do, we're going to show you the other part also that is fun and rewarding when you apply risk management knowingly using a framework, risk management framework. And the framework that we are going to use today is ISO 14971, risk management for medical devices. The first step of understanding risk management is to understand the anatomy of a risk. Harm occurs when a chain leads to the harm, and our objective would be to break that chain of harm. Let's take a look. Let's use this example. This example is for a gastrostomy tube, a catheter, feeding tube catheter. What could be a potential hazard? It's a chemical hazard. Let's say gastric acid. What could be an event, example of an event? Degradation of the tube material, leading it to cause stomach fluid leakage, which is the hazardous situation, the leakage of gastric acid onto the surrounding of the skin. And that leads to the harm. In this case, the harm would be skin irritation, breakdown, or formation of granulation tissue. So in risk management, our objective is to systematically put risk control measures in between every interface, or at every intersection and every interface, we place risk control measure, and thereby we break the chain, the pathway to harm. Now we'll go into the risk management process framework, the life cycle of risk management. Here we are showing the flow diagram consisting of 7 different steps. Okay? Starting with planning, ends with post-production monitoring. And in between you have the risk activities, risk analysis, risk evaluation, risk control, residual evaluation, and risk management review report. We'll discuss briefly all of them. So the question is, how do you go about putting those controls in place? Well, there is a methodology to it. So our first step in that methodology is the risk management plan. We must have a plan. In that plan, we must have management buy-in. Management needs to provide, first they need to recognize the need for risk management, and they need to provide the resources needed, and the resources need to be qualified. They need to be trained because it requires certain skill sets. And with that, they will be able to define the scope of the risk management, how to measure, how to verify, what kind of controls to provide in place, what's going to happen when the product is released into the market, how are you going to do a risk benefit analysis or benefit risk analysis, what are the acceptable criteria within the risk, and the phases and the responsibilities. All those things are defined within the risk management plan. Let's take a look at the plan, what the plan looks like. Here's an example of a risk management plan. You have a title section, you define your document ID, product information. Then comes the scope. You define the scope of this risk management plan, which is applicable throughout its life cycle from the initial concept to post-production. Okay. I always like to have an image of the device that we are addressing here in the risk management file. It helps me, I think it helps the audience to see the product that you are managing. Responsibilities is another section where you define the personnel responsible for managing the project, including top management, because they're responsible for providing the training, the resources, and the rest of the risk management team, including the production team that identifies risks related to production processes and monitors post-production data. You define your scope your definition, how your organization will be managing those within this area, in this section. Review of risk management activities. What are the risk management activities that will be performed under this project, under this plan? Criteria for risk acceptability. What means acceptable? What means as low as reasonably practicable with rational? And then when something is unacceptable, what are the risk control measures? And most importantly, what is the benefit risk analysis for justifying the risk? Right? Overall residual risk evaluation, any remaining risk that needs to be evaluated for benefit risk analysis. Any control measures that we have, risk control measures that we have implemented need to be verified. All controls need to be verified for their effectiveness. So effectiveness verification. Verification methods may include testing, verification and validation, inspections, analysis, demonstrations of what is functioning, what is performing. And finally, the production and post-production activities. When the design is complete, the risk management still continues on. So risk management is a journey, it's not a destination. That's what you have to remember. And you have to identify, you can identify here your sources of the post-production activities, okay? The data. Risk analysis systematically utilizes available data to identify hazards and estimate risk, beginning with intended use and reasonably foreseeable misuse. And it's usually broken into these 3 sections. And it can be broken into as many sections that you like. Chemical properties, biocompatibility, material, electrical properties, mechanical properties. When I do it, I like to have what I call a system view. There are different tools that you can use for risk analysis. Selecting the precise diagnostic tool for identifying hazards and hazardous situations is important. And it also depends on the skill sets, what you're comfortable with. So there are different tools. I, most of the time, use failure mode and effects analysis, FMEA. If it's for the design, you can call it DFMEA, it's called process, can be PFMEA. Most of the time, that's what I use. And I'll show you an example of that. Anything that I'm showing in this training, what I have used and I have done in my product development experience as an engineer. And so everything is practical, everything is proven. And so this ISO 14971, it provides you the methodology and shows you the roadmap, the pathway, and how you really implement it. You know, there are some options, including using different type of tools in this case. So I'm going to show you how I use the failure mode and effects analysis. But before I do so, I want to talk about the previous step of identifying risks, intended use, and reasonably foreseeable misuse. In my personal case, my team, myself, I laid out always a global view, a system view, a top view of any system that you're designing or developing, whether it's a manufacturing system, a medical device, any other systems. A system is that consisting of components and subsystems that work together as one system. So I would always look at the overall system. I would look at its subsystems. I would look at the interfaces. I would look at the architecture, the system diagram to identify the interfaces and weak points and how we can enhance them and improve them, applying engineering standards, company standards, quality system requirements, regulatory requirements. So you require a good amount of skill sets in order for to really do it right. But it's fun. At the end, it's very fun and it's rewarding because you know that everything that you have designed is working, it's saving life. So everything that you're learning here is practical, it's what I have done. It's not from a third-person view, but from the first-person. After you identified the potential risks or failure modes, The next step is to evaluate the risks. And risk is defined as the probability of occurrence and the severity of the risk if it occurs. Why? Because it is not enough to identify a hazard. You must determine how likely it is to happen and how bad the outcome will be so you can have proper mitigation. This process, the risk estimation process, converts the risks into quantifiable assessment using this scale. That then helps with decision making, where there are two measurements you're taking: the probability of occurrence, it's shown from incredible or very rare to frequent. That's the probability of occurrence, probability of occurring the risk or the hazard. The vertical scale here talks about severity of harm, that it starts with negligible all the way up to catastrophic. And they fill in this scale right here with different colors for decision making. Let's take a look. This is an example of a completely filled out heat map. The visual heat map allows team members to quickly identify where a specific risk falls. The upper area, the red section, is shown where the probability of the risk of occurrence and the severity of harm is high or unacceptable. The green area where the probability and the severity are low, so that means the risks are acceptable. And then you have the midsection, the yellow. The goal or objective is to bring all red into green and all red and yellow ideally to green as low as practically possible, as low as possible. And that is the reason you will be placing risk controls between the hazard that you've identified and the event, between the event and the hazardous situations, and between the hazardous situations and harm. So we identify using one of the tools. I'm going to show you one of the tools that I use and some risk control measures that we'll be placing in between, and the risk control measures will be based on the risk estimation that we just looked at. Okay. Here is the tool. Here is the FMEA that I mentioned earlier. Here it shows the risk identification, risk estimation, controls, verification method, residual risk assessment, all the way. So this document is important. It can be used as a traceability matrix also, because it shows the linkage between your design inputs all the way to verification validation. Okay, so the first column, and it depends, this is not just the one way. There are many ways to do this. I learned this years ago from the automotive industry, and I combined my learning from over time. And this is one of the, I would say, simplest yet effective ways of doing that. So the template can vary from industry to industry, person to person. So this is one of them. Category, first column is the category, device design. You can break that into even multiple categories within the design. And then you can have usability, labeling, packaging, sterilization. You can break it into many categories or sections as you need. ID, this ID can be linked to other documents like user needs, design inputs, and you can call it design input 1, 2, 3. It can be linked to your system requirements. If you call it system requirements instead of design inputs, then you can call it, system requirements number 4.1, 2, 3, so on and so forth. And then starts with device function, and then hazard, which is the source, then harm. In between hazard and harm, you can add other columns also, like event, hazardous situations, potential cause, and the controls we have in place. What are the controls? Followed by that, you can see the risk estimation, the severity, occurrence, RPN. Now, where do you get these numbers from? From the risk rating scale that your company uses. It can vary from company to company, okay? So that's the scale that tells you high risk, medium risk, low risk. And that's the combination of severity and occurrence that we talked about earlier, okay? Now, as you can see, a couple of them shows that medium risk and high risk. So we need to reduce that risk, right, further, need more risk controls. So provide more risk controls, and evidence needs to be there. Protocol, reports, analysis, demonstrations, inspections. After you confirm and verify that the new controls are reducing the risk, then you can do a residual risk assessment here. Did the occurrence go down? From here, it looks like it did. Did it go down? Yes. At the very end, we're putting a conclusion that says the risk is reduced as low as possible. Here is a word. Different standards over time, including 14971, they use different language. There is a reason for that. There is a intention behind it, like as low as reasonably practicable. That's one way. And then as far as possible. That's another way. I like to, when I do this design, I do this in my engineering design and evaluations, I use the word as low as possible. That's how I learned it, and it kind of makes more sense to me because I want to drive the risk as low as possible. So that's how I do it. After that, the quality and the regulatory team, they have this document and they may change it to whatever standard they are following, and they can change the language of that standard, okay? But just to give you an idea, this is how I do it, reducing the risk as low as possible. This concludes the end of part 1 of 2-part series of ISO 14971 risk management. If you want a summary or have questions, please see the description below. I will see you in part 2.